The world is not as you know it. To find the Silurian, we must drift backward, shedding the noise of the modern age, past the rise of the mammals, past the thunder of the dinosaurs, until the very shape of the continents begins to dissolve into a blue, primordial haze. Here, 443 million years ago, the Earth is a lonely sphere of water and stone, spinning beneath a sun that glows with a softer, younger light. The atmosphere is thin, smelling faintly of ozone and the sharp, metallic tang of volcanic ash, yet it is the sea that holds the soul of this era. It is a world defined by the Panthalassic Ocean, a body of water so vast it defies the human imagination. A singular sapphire desert stretching from pole to pole, interrupted only by the drifting barren land masses of Gondwana and Euramerica. The surface of this ancient sea is a glass horizon. Without the complex terrestrial forests to break the wind, the storms of the Silurian are monumental. Yet in the moments of calm, the water settles into a terrifying, perfect stillness. There is no birdsong. There is no rustle of leaves. There is only the rhythmic, heavy lap of a tide that is pulled by a moon much closer to the Earth than it is today. This proximity creates a gravitational violence, a tugging of the world's oceans that sends massive surges deep into the heart of the continents, flooding the lowlands and creating vast, shallow epicontinental seas. These are the nurseries of the Silurian, warm, sun-drenched and rich with the dissolved minerals of a world still being forged in the heat of its own creation. As you drift beneath the surface, the transition is seamless. The light does not vanish all at once. Instead, it filters through the brine and long emerald shafts, illuminating a suspension of microscopic life that dances in the currents. The temperature is an embrace the greenhouse world of the Silurian has melted the great ice caps of the previous age, raising the sea levels and stabilizing the climate into a long, humid summer. But beneath this warmth lies the crushing reality of deep time. The pressure is a physical presence, a weight that settles against the skin like a shroud of lead. It is a reminder that in this realm, gravity and liquid are the twin masters of existence. Here, the silence is not empty. It is a dense, vibrating medium. You hear the internal thrum of the planet, the low-frequency groan of tectonic plates shifting a millimeter at a time, and the far-off clicking of life forms that have no names in the tongues of men. To be here is to understand the absolute insignificance of the human heartbeat. You are a ghost in a cathedral of salt and silt, witnessing a time when the master of the world was not a creature of intellect, but a creature of armor and instinct. The Silurian Sea does not care for your arrival, nor will it mourn your departure. It simply exists, a vast chemical engine of evolution, processing the debris of the old world to create the biological blueprints of the new. In the distance, where the sunlight begins to fail and the emerald turns to a bruised, lightless purple, the first silhouettes appear. They move with a hydraulic grace, their segmented bodies rippling through the water column with a precision that speaks of millions of years of refinement. They are the heralds of a new order. As the glass horizon fades above you, replaced by the weight of the deep, you begin to realize that this is not a world of lack, but a world of terrifying abundance. The rise of the armored scorpions is about to begin, and the silence of the sea is the only witness to their coronation. The Silurian period does not begin with a burst of life, but with a weary, freezing breath. To understand the world of the sea scorpion, one must first touch the scars left by the High-Nantian glaciation, the great cold that brought the preceding Ordovician period to a devastating icy close. It was a time when the pulse of the planet slowed to a near halt, as massive ice sheets marched across the supercontinent of Gondwana, locking the world's water into white, sterile prisons. Sea levels plummeted, draining the shallow, sunlit cradles of evolution and leaving millions of species to perish in the receding brine. But as the Silurian dawns, the Earth begins to tilt toward a long, feverish thaw. The ice, once an immovable tyrant, starts to weep. As the glaciers retreat, they release an unimaginable volume of fresh water and trapped minerals back into the global basin. This is a continental rebirth. The sea levels rise with a slow, relentless patience, creeping back over the parched limestone platforms to reclaim the lost territories of the shelf. You can almost feel the relief of the planet as the warmth returns, a thermal expansion that stirs the stagnant depths and restarts the great conveyor belts of oceanic circulation. The water is no longer a lethal, oxygen-starved desert. It is becoming a nutrient-rich broth, thick with the chemical legacy of the mountains that the ice ground into dust. This is the stage upon which the armored giants will eventually walk a world recovering from the brink of total silence. The atmosphere of this early Silurian recovery is heavy with carbon dioxide, a greenhouse blanket that traps the sun's radiation and ensures the mercury stays high. There is a profound stillness to this warming world. The terrestrial continents are still vast red-brown expanses of naked rock and silicate sand, devoid of the softening influence of forests. Without plants to anchor the soil, the rains wash vast plumes of sediment into the sea, turning the coastal waters into a murky, golden haze. It is in this twilight visibility that life begins to retool itself. The survivors of the extinction, the hardy brachiopods, the resilient trilobites, and the primitive jawless fish find themselves in a landscape of vacant niches, a biological vacuum waiting to be filled by something faster, stronger, and more predatory. The chemistry of the ocean itself is shifting. The melting ice has altered the salinity, creating layers of water that move like liquid silk over one another. In the deep trenches, the water remains cold and ancient, a memory of the glaciation, but in the new epicontinental seas, the water is as warm as blood. This thermal gradient creates the first true weather patterns of the Silurian underwater storms of silt and heat that tumble across the seafloor. For a creature living in the sediment, the world is a constant vibration of change. The great cold is now a ghost, a layer of dark shale buried beneath the new vibrant limestone, marking the boundary between a world that almost died and a world that is learning how to hunt. Reflection on this transition reveals a somber truth. Life is defined by its scars. Every creature that swims in the Silurian Sea carries the genetic echo of that frozen narrow gate. The sea scorpions, the Eurypterids, are children of this recovery. Their ancestors were the ones who endured the shrinking shallows and the oxygen-deprived lagoons of the extinction. They emerged not weakened, but refined by the hardship, possessing a ruggedness that would soon allow them to dominate the water column. They are the architects of a new era, rising from the ruins of a world that was once entirely white, now turning a deep predatory green. The sun sets over a world without a single blade of grass, casting long orange shadows across the ripples of the incoming tide. Beneath those ripples, the first true giants are stirring in the mud, their chitinous limbs twitching as they sense the return of the heat. The era of the ice is over. The era of the armor has begun. To sink into the Silurian is to enter a medium that is chemically distinct from the oceans of the modern world. If you were to taste these ancient waters, you would find them heavier, thick, briny soup with a salinity significantly higher than the Atlantic or Pacific of your time. This is a calcite sea, a world where the very balance of ions in the water favors the precipitation of low magnesium calcite. For the life forms drifting in this silence, the water is not just a habitat, it is a construction material. Every breath of a primitive gill, every filter-feeding rhythm of a brachiopod is a transaction with the minerals of the deep. The chemistry of this era is dominated by the absence of the great terrestrial forests that would one day regulate the planet's carbon cycle. Without the deep roots of trees to break down the continents, the runoff into the Panthalassic and Iapetus oceans is strictly mineral, a steady infusion of calcium, iron and silica stripped from the naked volcanic crust. This abundance of calcium is what allows the Silurian to become the age of armor. It is the raw fuel for the skeletal revolution. From the delicate, lattice-like frames of the bryozoans to the heavy, reinforced carapaces of the sea scorpions, life is essentially crystallizing the ocean's chemistry into mobile, predatory forms. The sea is a sculptor, and the creatures are its hardened masterpieces. Temperature and oxygen play a slow, rhythmic game of hide-and-seek in these depths. The Silurian is a greenhouse world, and warm water holds less dissolved oxygen than the frigid currents of the great cold. This creates a stratified ocean layer of life-giving, oxygenated water near the surface, resting precariously atop vast, anoxic basins where the silence is absolute and lethal. These dead zones are the graveyards of the Silurian. When a storm or a tectonic shift causes these oxygen-poor waters to well up onto the continental shelves, it triggers localized extinctions, sudden hushes in the fossil record where thousands of creatures are snuffed out in a single breathless moment. Yet in the shallows, the chemistry is a vibrant, bubbling laboratory. The proximity of the sun fuels massive blooms of cyanobacteria and green algae, which pulse with a neon intensity against the limestone seafloor. These tiny architects are the true engines of the Silurian atmosphere, slowly exhaling the oxygen that will eventually allow life to crawl onto the land. They create marine snow, a constant, gentle rain of organic debris that drifts down through the water column, feeding the scavengers below. As you watch this silver dust settle, you realize that every flake is a bit of stored sunlight, a chemical promise kept for the creatures of the dark. There is a profound meditative quality to this chemical balance. It represents a planet in a state of high energy equilibrium, a world that is cooking the ingredients of complexity. The high CO2 levels and the warm, mineral-heavy seas are the perfect crucible for the Eurypterids. Their chitinous shells are not merely shields. They are sophisticated chemical barriers, managing the osmotic pressure of a high-salt environment while providing the structural integrity needed to grow to terrifying sizes. In this silent, briny theatre, the sea scorpion is the ultimate expression of its environment, a creature made of the very salt and stone it inhabits. As the sun dips below the horizon, the chemical signature of the water changes. The pH shifts slightly, the temperature drops a fraction of a degree, and the bioluminescent plankton begin their nightly cold fire glow. In this shifting chemistry, we see the fragility of existence. We are reminded that life is not a permanent fixture, but a delicate ongoing reaction, a brief flickering flame, sustained by the precise arrangement of atoms in a vast and indifferent sea. To move across the Silurian seafloor is to walk through a city built of bone and sunlight. Unlike the coral reefs of the modern world, dominated by scleractinian corals, the foundations of the Silurian are laid by strangers, the tabulate and rugose corals. These are the architects of the Paleozoic shallows, organisms that did not merely inhabit the ocean, but physically transformed it. As you drift over a Silurian reef complex, the first thing you notice is the geometry. There are no soft waving fans of purple or gold. Instead, the landscape is one of rigid, calcified honeycomb structures and solitary horn-shaped towers reaching up through the teal water. The tabulate corals, such as favosites, grow in massive colonial mounds. From a distance, they resemble pale, submerged brains or geometric wasp nests. Each tiny hexagonal cell housing a delicate polyp. These polyps are the heartbeat of the reef, their translucent tentacles combing the currents for microscopic prey. Beside them, the rugose corals, often called horn corals, stand like discarded stone vessels. Some are small and solitary, anchored in the soft silt, while others grow into twisted colonial thickets. Together, they create a fractured, labyrinthine world of shadows and crevices, providing the first complex three-dimensional habitats in the history of the planet. The atmosphere within these stone forests is one of frantic, silent competition. Space is the most valuable currency in the Silurian. Every square inch of the reef is contested. Brachiopods anchor themselves to the coral flanks with fleshy stalks, their shells scarred by the boring sponges that seek to dissolve them from within. Bryozoans, the moss animals, weave intricate lacy fans across the gaps, filtering the water with a mechanical persistence. This is the skeleton revolution in its most exuberant form. The water is so saturated with calcium carbonate that life cannot help but overflow into mineral form, creating a feedback loop where the biological becomes the geological. But these reefs are more than just architecture. They are sensory minefields. The structural complexity of the coral creates 1,000 hiding places for the burgeoning predator classes. In the dark caves formed by overlapping tabulate plates, the first primitive eels and jawless fish find sanctuary from the open water hunters. However, this sanctuary is an illusion. The very cracks that provide cover for the weak also serve as ambush points for the rising armored scorpions. A Eurypterid can press its flat, chitinous belly against the coral, its compound eyes mimicking the dappled light of the shallows, becoming a ghost within the stone until the moment it strikes. As you linger in this submerged city, you feel the immense weight of time. These reefs did not grow in years or decades, but in millennia, layer upon microscopic layer of calcite deposited by generations of polyps that knew nothing of the world above the waves. They are monuments to persistence. Yet they are also fragile. A shift in ocean pH or a sudden influx of cold, deep-sea water can turn these vibrant metropolises into white, skeletal graveyards in a matter of centuries. The reef is a testament to the precarious balance of the Silurian, a brief window of stability in a world that is otherwise defined by the slow, grinding drift of continents and the rising heat of a restless sun. The light begins to fade as the tide retreats, leaving the tops of the tallest coral heads exposed to the alien air. In the deepening shadows of the reef space, the true masters of this era begin to emerge from their day sleep. The foundations have been laid, the city is built, and now the hunters are coming to claim the streets. As we descend deeper into the structural heart of the Silurian reef, we encounter a presence that is as ancient as it is enigmatic. Beneath the branching horns of the corals lies the stromatoporoid shadow. These organisms, a specialized class of calcareous sea sponges, were the true heavyweights of the Paleozoic seafloor. They did not grow with the delicate grace of a flower, they grew like stone, forming massive laminated mounds that could reach several meters in diameter. They acted as the bedrock of the Silurian ecosystem, welding the loose debris of the ocean floor into a permanent iron-hard pavement. To the touch, a living stromatoporoid would have felt like cold, slime-covered rock. Their surface was a landscape of tiny, volcanic-like bumps called mamelons, through which they pulsed the surrounding seawater, filtering out organic particles with a silent, relentless efficiency. There is a strange, meditative quality to their existence. They are among the slowest of all living things, adding only a fraction of a millimeter to their mass each year. In the time it takes for a sea scorpion to live out its entire predatory life, a stromatoporoid has barely added a single layer to its calcified stack. They are the record keepers of deep time, their internal rings of growth capturing the chemical fluctuations of the ocean across centuries. In the Silurian, these sponges were the ultimate ecosystem engineers. By creating massive stable islands of calcium carbonate, they provided the necessary friction for other life forms to take hold. Without the stromatoporoids, the powerful Silurian tides would have swept the seafloor clean, preventing the corals and brachiopods from ever establishing their cities. They were the silent partners of the reef, the immovable anchors in a world of shifting currents. Yet their dominance also created a world of deep, jagged shadows perfectly suited for the patient hunter. The crevices between these massive mounds became the preferred lair of the early Eurypterids, who found the rough, encrusted surfaces of the sponges to be the perfect camouflage for their own textured exoskeletons. The philosophy of the stromatoporoid is one of endurance over excellence. They do not hunt, they do not flee, they simply remain. In a world that was beginning to move faster with the evolution of fins and the sharpening of claws, the stromatoporoids represented the old guard of the biological world. They are a reminder that the most successful organisms are often the ones that are the least noticed. They survived the Great Cold, and they would survive the coming heat, slowly building their stone empires while more flamboyant species flickered and vanished in the blink of a geological eye. As the currents pull a veil of silt over the reef, the stromatoporoids disappear into the gloom, looking like nothing more than boulders on a forgotten path. But beneath that stillness, the pulse of the sponge continues, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that has not changed in millions of years. They are the shadow in which the Silurian grew, the silent foundation upon which the drama of the armored scorpions would soon unfold with violent, sudden speed. At last, we turn our gaze to the protagonist of this submerged theatre, the Eurypterid, often called the sea scorpion. This creature is not a true scorpion in the modern sense, but a member of an extinct group of chelicerate arthropods that redefine the limits of the exoskeleton. To visualize a Eurypterid is to imagine a fusion of biological precision and industrial strength. Its body is a masterpiece of segmentation, encased in a shimmering chitinous armor that catches the filtered sunlight in hues of burnished bronze and deep, muddy green. The pulse of the Eurypterid is a mechanical rhythm. Unlike the soft, billowing movements of a jellyfish or the fluid undulations of a primitive eel, the sea scorpion moves with a segmented, hydraulic grace. Its body is divided into a front section, the prosoma, which houses its brain, its compound eyes, and its formidable array of limbs, followed by a long, tapering abdomen that ends in a telson or tail spine. In many species, the hindmost limbs have evolved into broad, flat paddles. As these paddles sweep through the water, they create a distinctive, low-frequency thrum, a vibration that travels through the water column like a silent warning to anything smaller than itself. Beneath the armor, the physiology of the sea scorpion is a marvel of Silurian engineering. They possess book gills, thin, leaf-like structures arranged like the pages of a manuscript, protected by ventral plates. These gills allow them to extract oxygen from the briny Silurian waters with remarkable efficiency, but they also represent a pivotal evolutionary bridge. Some species possess gills reinforced in a way that suggests they could venture, if only briefly, into the oxygen-rich air of the tidal flats. This is the heart of the Eurypterids' power. It is a creature that exists on the edge of two worlds, mastering the water while testing the boundaries of the land. The sensory world of the sea scorpion is one of intense panoramic detail. Atop their heads sit two large, bean-shaped compound eyes, capable of detecting the slightest flicker of movement in the murky shallows. Between these lie two smaller, simple isocelli, which likely acted as light sensors, helping the creature navigate by the position of the sun even when buried in the silt. To be a Eurypterid is to perceive the ocean as a grid of movement and pressure. They feel the heartbeat of a nearby trilobite through the hairs on their legs. They sense the chemical signature of a dying fish from hundreds of yards away. They are the first true masters of the tactical hunt. Reflecting on the Eurypterid's design, one senses a terrifying perfection. It is a form that remained largely unchanged for millions of years because it simply did not need to improve. It was the apex of its time, a tank in a world of soft-bodied drifters. Yet there is a profound loneliness in their design. They are solitary, driven by a cold, chitinous logic that values only survival and the hunt. They do not nurture, they do not play, they simply pulse with the ancient rhythm of the tides, a biological machine perfectly tuned to the frequency of the Silurian deep. As we watch a lone Eurypterid settle into the soft carbonate sand, its paddles tucking neatly against its side, we see the blueprint for all the predators that would follow. It is the ancestor of the nightmare, a creature of shadow and shell that proved, for the first time in Earth's history, that to be armored was to be king. In the crystal-clear shallows of the Silurian lagoons, where the sun plays in caustic ripples across the white carbonate sands, dwells the undisputed titan of the age, Pterygotus. If the standard Eurypterid is a marvel of engineering, Pterygotus is the era's ultimate excess. Reaching lengths of over 2 meters, it is a nightmare of chitin and precision, a creature that pushed the limits of how large an arthropod could grow before the laws of physics and oxygen diffusion demanded a different design. To see its shadow pass over the seafloor is to witness the first true apex predator of the Silurian world. The defining feature of Pterygotus is its specialized predatory limbs, the chelicerae. Unlike its cousins, who might possess modest pincers, Pterygotus is armed with elongated, jointed appendages tipped with formidable tooth-lined claws. These are not merely for scavenging, they're high-speed reaching tools capable of snapping out with a hydraulic velocity that would leave a primitive fish paralyzed before it could register the threat. The sensory input required to coordinate such a strike is immense, and accordingly, the head of Pterygotus is dominated by massive wraparound compound eyes. These eyes provide a near panoramic view of the water column, optimized to detect the shimmering, silver silhouettes of prey against the bright surface light. To imagine the life of Pterygotus is to imagine a life of Pterygotus is to imagine a life of patient, sun-drenched lethargy, punctuated by moments of explosive violence. It is a master of the ambush. It would likely bury its massive, flat body just beneath a thin layer of sand, its large eyes poking out like twin observers of the tide. In this state, it is indistinguishable from the ripples of the seafloor. The silence of the shallows is its greatest ally. When a school of jawless thelodonts or a lone, drifting cephalopod wanders within range, the sand erupts. The massive paddles at its rear provide a singular, powerful thrust, and the chelicerae extend in a blur of motion. The struggle is brief. The Silurian Sea is a world where the speed of the claw is the final word on survival. The success of Pterygotus represents a pivotal moment in the history of life, the dawn of the arms race. Its presence forced every other creature in its environment to adapt or perish. Fish began to develop heavier dermal armor. Trilobites developed more sophisticated spines and the ability to roll into impenetrable balls. The master of the shallows dictated the evolutionary path of the entire ecosystem. Yet, for all its power, Pterygotus was bound by the chemistry of its home. It required the high mineral content of the Silurian waters to maintain its massive exoskeleton and the specific oxygen levels of the shallows to fuel its high metabolism strikes. There is a haunting beauty in the way Periotus glides through the shallows, a golden, armored ghost in a world that has never known a human footprint. It is a reminder that dominance is often a matter of scale and perspective. In its time, Periotus was as formidable as any great white shark or tyrannosaur, a pinnacle of biological ambition. Yet, its reign was tied to a world of shallow seas and high tides that would eventually vanish. As we watch it drift into the deeper teal of the reef edge, its compound eyes reflecting a sun that will eventually set on its kind, we feel the profound, quiet weight of the eons. The master of the shallows has fed. Now it returns to the stillness of the sand, waiting for the moon to pull the tide back over its armored head. While the sea scorpions claimed the surface of the seafloor, a silent revolution was occurring within the water column itself, a transformation that would eventually end the reign of the arthropods. This was the birth of the jaw. For millions of years, the fish of the Paleozoic were jawless, known as achnithants. They were vacuum cleaners of the deep, limited to sucking organic detritus from the silts or filtering microscopic life through primitive gill slits. But in the mid-Silurian, a subtle shift in the skeletal architecture of the head began to change the fundamental nature of hunger. The origin of the jaw is one of evolution's most elegant repurposings. Ancient fish possessed a series of cartilaginous rods that supported their gills, the branchial arches. Through a slow generational drift, the first pair of these arches began to migrate forward. They hinged, strengthened, and eventually became a frame for the mouth. This was not a sudden leap, but a slow, rhythmic refinement. Initially, these proto-jaws may have served simply to allow for more powerful breathing, pumping more oxygenated water over the gills. But once the mouth could snap shut, the world changed. The passive act of feeding became the active act of biting. The first jawed vertebrates, the placoderms and earlier canthodians, were not yet the giants they would become in the Devonian, but they were already a threat. To see a jawed fish for the first time is to see the birth of the face. For the first time, a creature had a mouth that could grip, tear, and manipulate the world around it. This skeletal innovation allowed fish to move away from the seafloor and into the open water, where they could hunt with a three-dimensional freedom that the bottom-dwelling Eurypterids could not match. The jaw was a key that unlocked the entire ocean, transforming the sea from a collection of silos into a unified battlefield. This evolutionary milestone carries a heavy philosophical weight. The jaw is the physical manifestation of intent. To possess a jaw is to be able to choose what you consume, to hold on to a fragment of the world and make it your own. In the Silurian, this transition was a quiet one, happening in the shadow of the great armored scorpions, but it represented a permanent shift in the balance of power. The sea scorpions were masters of the external skeleton, the armor, but the fish were mastering the internal skeleton, the engine. As we watch a small jawed placoderm dart through the coral thickets, we are seeing the distant ancestor of every shark, every lion, and every human being. The mechanics of your own speech, the way you breathe, and the way you eat are all echoes of this Silurian hinge. The chemistry of silence was being broken by the snap of bone on bone. The scorpions, with their ancient external pincers, were now facing a rival that carried its weapons on the inside, hidden behind a face that was slowly learning to hunt the hunters. The sun begins to set on the era of the vacuum. The age of the bite has begun, and the Silurian sea will never be peaceful again. In the sun-dappled midwaters of the Silurian, away from the heavy shadows of the sea scorpions, a different kind of beauty flickers. This is the realm of Berkania, a small spindle-shaped creature that represents the height of jawless fish sophistication. Unlike the lumbering, bottom-dwelling armored fish that would follow, Berkania is a master of the open column, a shimmering needle of life that navigates the currents with a rhythmic, fluttering grace. To see a shoal of Berkania is to see the Silurian Ocean's version of a silver cloud, reacting to the shift of light and the pulse of the tide as a single collective mind. The armor of Berkania is not the heavy monolithic plate of the Eurypterid, but a sophisticated tapestry of small overlapping scales. These scales are arranged in diagonal rows, slanted downward and backward along its body like the shingles on a roof. This imbricated armor serves a dual purpose. It provides a flexible shield against the small predators of the reef while maintaining an aerodynamic, or rather hydrodynamic, perfection. Under a microscope, these scales reveal a complex histology of dentine and bone-like tissue, a precursor to the scales of modern fish. They catch the light in a dull, pearlescent sheen, making the Burkania appear as if it were forged from cold silk and ancient minerals. The sensory life of Burkania is defined by the lateral linum primitive version of the distant touch system used by modern fish. Even without jaws, Burkania is acutely aware of its surroundings. Along its flanks, specialized cells detect the minute pressure waves caused by a passing predator or the closing of the sea scorpion's claw. It moves via a series of rhythmic muscular contractions, its eel-like body undulating in a way that is both hypnotic and highly efficient. It lacks the paired fins of later fish, possessing instead a series of small, thorny spines along its back and a downward tilting tail. This hypocal tail is a signature of its era, providing the downward thrust needed to keep this light, buoyant creature from bobbing helplessly toward the surface. Feeding for Burkania is a meditative, constant process. Its mouth is a simple, circular opening, positioned at the very front of its head. It is a filter feeder, a living siphon that drifts through clouds of plankton and marine snow. There is no violence in its consumption. It simply accepts what the ocean provides, processing the microscopic bounty of the Silurian through its gill slits with a mechanical, rhythmic persistence. In this way, Burkania is a bridge between the ancient, passive life of the Cambrian and the active, predatory future. It is a creature that has mastered the art of being in between, armored yet agile, ancient yet refined. Reflecting on the Burkania brings a sense of fragile wonder. It is a reminder that even in an age of giants and armored killers, there was a place for the small and the graceful. Its existence was a testament to the fact that survival is not always about the strength of the bite, but often about the precision of the escape and the ability to find nourishment in the invisible. As the shoal of Burkania darts away into the emerald gloom, their scales flashing one last time like a handful of silver coins tossed into a well, we realize that they are the silent ancestors of the beauty we still see in our oceans today. The light of the afternoon sun begins to bend as the water deepens, and the silver flash of the Burkania is swallowed by the approaching dusk. Below them, the heavy weights of the sea are beginning to stir. To descend further into the Silurian is to grapple with the invisible physics of the deep, the relentless suffocating pressure of the water, and the chemical tyranny of salt. In this era, the oceans were not merely a habitat, they were a high-pressure laboratory. The Silurian Sea was a brine world with salinity levels that would dehydrate a modern freshwater fish in minutes. For the creatures of this time, survival was a constant, microscopic battle of osmosis, a rhythmic struggle to maintain the delicate balance of fluids within their armored shells against the drawing power of the mineral-heavy abyss. As you sink, the light transitions from emerald to a bruised, lightless indigo. The crushing weight is not merely a metaphor. For every 10 meters of descent, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. At these depths, the air-filled cavities that characterize modern life would be flattened, but the Silurian masters are built of liquid, silt, and stone. The sea scorpions and the orthocones are essentially non-compressible. Their internal pressures are perfectly tuned to the external weight of the ocean, allowing them to glide through the midnight zone as if they were weightless. They do not feel the pressure as a burden, but as a stabilizing force, a cold embrace that holds their complex, segmented bodies together. The chemistry of salt in the Silurian acts as both a preservative and a poison. The high concentration of sodium and chloride ions creates a high-density medium, making the water more viscous, more thick than the water we know today. Swimming through it requires more energy, but it also provides more buoyancy. This is why we see the rise of the massive straight-shell cephalopods, the orthocones, which can reach lengths of 5 meters or more. They use the high-density brine to their advantage, drifting like horizontal pillars through the water. Their internal chambers filled with gas to counteract the mineral weight of the sea. In the deepest trenches, where the Silurian sun is a forgotten myth, the chemistry of silence takes on a darker tone. Here, the water is often anoxic, void of oxygen. These basins are the salt traps of the ancient world. Organic matter that falls from the sunlit layers above does not rot. It is pickled by the brine and preserved in the oxygen-free mud. This creates the dark, carbon-rich shales that geologists study today. For a Eurypterid that wanders too deep, these basins are a silent trap. If they slip below the chemocline, the invisible boundary where oxygen disappears and the salt concentration spikes, they find themselves in a world where the very water they breathe becomes a suffocating shroud. There is a profound, stoic philosophy to be found in this high-pressure existence. It reminds us that life does not require comfort to thrive. It only requires adaptation. The creatures of the Silurian did not seek to escape the salt or the pressure. They incorporated it into their very being. They became the salt. They became the pressure. To live in the Silurian was to be an extension of the ocean's own chemical will. A momentary gathering of ions and minerals into a form that could move, sense, and hunt before eventually dissolving back into the brine. As we hover in the indigo twilight between the sunlit reefs and the anoxic trenches, we feel the true scale of the Silurian. It is a world of immense, slow-moving forces, where the pulse of life is dictated by the salinity of the tide and the weight of the water column. The master of the shallows may be the king of the light, but in the deep, the salt is the only true sovereign. To look upon the Silurian seafloor is not to see sand or silt, but to behold a living, breathing tapestry of stone. This is the empire of the brachiopods. While the sea scorpions plane the headlines of history with their size and terror, it is the brachiopod that defines the visual landscape of the Paleozoic. In these warm, shallow seas, they occur in such staggering numbers that they form a living carpet, a rhythmic undulation of millions of shells that stretches from the reef's edge to the dark horizon of the continental shelf. At first glance, you might mistake them for modern clams or mussels, but the brachiopod is a creature of a different lineage entirely. Their symmetry is unique. Whereas a clam's shells are mirrored left to right, a brachiopod's shells, the dorsal and ventral valves, are mirrored top to bottom. Most are arched to the substrate by a fleshy, muscular stalk called a pedicle, which emerges from a tiny hole in the hinge. They do not move, they do not migrate. They are the ultimate practitioners of the stationary life, trusting in the Silurian currents to bring the world to them. The sensory world of a brachiopod is a study in minimalist patience. Inside the shell lies the lophor, a delicate, crown-like structure of ciliated tentacles that serves as both lung and mouth. As the tide sweeps over the carpet, millions of shells crack open just a few millimeters and the lophors begin their work. They create microscopic vortices, drawing in the mineral-rich water and filtering out the organic debris of the sea. There is a profound meditative sound to this collective, wet clicking as millions of valves open and shut in response to the pressure of a passing shadow or change in the water's chemistry. Life within the carpet is a struggle for tiering, the biological equivalent of urban planning, to avoid being smothered by their neighbors. Different species of brachiopods have old shells of varying heights and shapes. Some are flat and broad, like discarded coins, resting on the surface of the mud. Others grow into spiraled wing-like forms or develop long, stabilizing spines that allow them to float atop the shifting carbonate sands. This structural diversity transforms the seafloor into a complex, jagged terrain, creating a micro-wilderness where tiny trilobites and worms can find refuge from the prying eyes of the larger hunters. There is an inherent dignity in the brachiopod's existence. They are the survivors of the Great Cold, and they will endure for hundreds of millions of years, outlasting the very sea scorpions that currently hunt above them. They represent the baseline of life, the quiet, persistent force that processes the ocean's energy and turns it into geology. When a brachiopod dies, its shell does not vanish, it becomes a part of the floor, a new foundation for the next generation. The limestone cliffs of the future are built upon the backs of these silent, hard-shell billions. As the Silurian moon pulls the tide back, the carpet of brachiopods responds with a singular, hushed closure. The shells snap shut, sealing in a tiny reservoir of the ancient sea to sustain them until the water returns. In this moment of stillness, you realize that the history of the Earth is not written only in the lives of the giants, but in the patient, rhythmic breathing of the carpet beneath your feet. While the sea scorpions dominate the seafloor, the open water column belongs to a masterpiece of biological mathematics, the orthocone. These are the ancestors of the modern nautilus and squid, but their form is a striking departure from the coiled shells we know today. An orthocone is a living spear, a straight, tapering cone of calcium carbonate that can reach lengths of over 5 meters. They drift through the Silurian twilight like the silent hulls of ancient submarines, governed by the laws of buoyancy and the cold nautical geometry of the deep. The interior of an orthocone shell is a marvel of Paleozoic engineering. It is not a solid mass, but a series of sealed chambers known as camerae, divided by walls called septa. The living animal occupies only the outermost, largest chamber. Running through the center of all these rooms is a fleshy tube called the siphuncle. By manipulating the gas and liquid levels within these chambers via the siphuncle, the orthocone can adjust its position in the water column with surgical precision. It does not swim so much as it hovers, a massive horizontal weight maintained in perfect equilibrium by the invisible hand of physics. The sensory experience of an orthocone is centered on its head, which emerges from the open end of the cone in a cluster of flexible, muscular tentacles. These tentacles lack the suckers of modern octopuses. Instead, they are coated in a sticky mucus and equipped with powerful chemical sensors. The orthocone smells the water, tracking the scent of a bleeding fish or a molting trilobite across miles of open ocean. Its beak, hidden at the center of the tentacle crown, is a sharp, chitinous tool capable of cracking the heaviest Eurypterid armor. To be an orthocone is to be a creature of the long view, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for the current to deliver a meal. Movement for these giants is a matter of jet propulsion. By forcefully expelling water through a flexible funnel, the orthocone can pulse backward with surprising speed. However, their straight shells make them cumbersome. They are the heavy cruisers of the Silurian, built for momentum rather than agility. In the vastness of the Panthalassic Ocean, this was an advantage. They could patrol the depths where the light fails, moving through the midnight zone where the pressure is immense and the silence is absolute. They represent the first time life achieved a truly massive scale in the open sea, proving that the vacuum of the water column could support giants just as easily as the reef. There is a haunting architectural beauty to the orthocone. When they die, their shells do not decompose. They sink to the bottom, where they are often colonized by bryozoans or used as shelters by small jawless fish. In the fossil record, these long, straight cones often point in the same direction, a final stony record of the direction the Silurian currents were flowing on the day they fell. They are the wind veins of deep time, marking the movement of a world that has long since vanished. As we watch an orthocone drift slowly into the darkness, its long shell vanishing like a ghost into the murk, we are reminded of the transience of power. For a time, these were the largest eyes and the sharpest beaks in the world. They were the geometry of terror, but even they are subject to the slow grind of the eons, destined to be replaced by the more agile, coiled hunters of the ages to come. In the rhythmic cycle of the Silurian year, there comes a moment when the solitary logic of the hunt is suspended. Driven by the pull of the moon and the warming of the shallow lagoons, the Eurypterids begin a slow mass migration toward the tidal flats. This is the time of the mating rites, a rare, vulnerable gathering of armored titans in the moonlit shallows. Here, the sea scorpions move with a deliberate ritualistic grace, their chitinous plates clicking against one another in a sound like shifting stones. The biological imperative for this gathering is rooted in the necessity of the molt. For an arthropod to grow, it must shed its rigid exoskeleton, leaving its soft, pulsing body exposed to the world for several hours. In the Silurian, this was a moment of extreme peril. By gathering in vast numbers in the shallowest waters, often where larger predators like Pterygotus or the great orthocones could not follow, the Eurypterids found safety in numbers. These lagoons became molting graveyards, where thousands of discarded translucent shells accumulated in the silt, creating a ghostly architecture of lives previously lived. The mating itself is a dance of tactile precision. Eurypterids possess specialized appendages on their undersides known as genital opercula. In many species, these structures are sexually dimorphic, meaning the male and female forms are distinct, designed to lock together in a brief mechanical embrace. They communicate not through sound, but through vibration and chemical signaling. A male might tap his walking legs against the sediment, sending a rhythmic pulse through the water that a female can sense through the delicate hairs on her carapace. It is a courtship of distant touch, conducted in the murky half-light of the Silurian dusk. Once the eggs are fertilized, the females tend to them with a surprising primitive care. In some species, the eggs are carried beneath the broad plates of the abdomen. protected from the scavenging trilobites and small jawless fish that haunt the edges of the breeding grounds. This period of brooding represents one of the earliest examples of parental investment in the fossil record. It is a reminder that even in a world of eat or be eaten, the preservation of the next generation requires a temporary truce with the environment. The lagoon becomes a sanctuary, a quiet cradle where the blueprints for future monsters are kept safe from the churning currents of the open sea. There is a profound somber beauty to these mating grounds. Under the silver light of a moon that looms massive in the sky, the water is a mosaic of armored shadows. When the sun rises, many of the adults will have retreated to the deep, leaving behind only the shimmering ruins of their old shells and the hidden promise of the next generation. It is a cycle that has repeated for millions of years, a testament to the endurance of the arthropod design. They are the masters of the long game, ensuring their lineage survives through a mixture of individual strength and collective ritual. As the tide recedes, the lagoons grow still. The discarded carapaces bleach in the sun, turning a pale stony white before the next tide buries them in the carbonate sand. The mating rites are over, and the sea scorpions return to the silence of the hunt, their ancient cold-blooded mission renewed once more. While the drama of the Silurian unfolds in the crushing decks and sunlit reefs, a quiet green revolution is beginning at the water's edge. For billions of years, the continents have been graveyard silent, a landscape of scorched basalt and shifting dunes. But now, in the damp salt-sprayed margins of the estuaries, a pioneer appears. This is Cooksonia. It is the first true vascular plant, a fragile, spindly herald of the terrestrial future that is barely as tall as a human thumb. To look at Cooksonia is to see the first breath of the land. The anatomy of Cooksonia is a study in primitive elegance. It lacks leaves, roots, or flowers. Instead, it consists of a simple Y-shaped stem that branches repeatedly, a pattern known as dichotomous branching. At the tip of each branch sits a small bulbous capsule called a sporangium, which houses the spores of the next generation. These stems are reinforced with lignin, a complex organic polymer that provides the structural spine necessary to stand upright against the pull of gravity. For the first time, life is no longer supported by the buoyancy of the water. It is standing on its own, reaching toward a sun that is no longer filtered through the teal lens of the sea. The transition from water to land is a physiological gauntlet. To survive the first breath, Cooksonia had to solve the problem of desiccation, the drying power of the air. It developed a waxy cuticle, a waterproof skin that seals in moisture, and microscopic pores called stomata that allow it to breathe carbon dioxide without losing its life-sustaining water. Beneath the surface of the mud, it lacks true roots, relying instead on a horizontal creeping stem called a rhizome, and a symbiotic relationship with ancient fungi to draw nutrients from the sterile Silurian soil. It is a fragile bridge between the mineral world and the biological one. This greening of the coastlines has a profound effect on the sea scorpions. As Cooksonia and its kin begin to colonize the banks of rivers and lagoons, they create the first terrestrial habitats. They provide shade, they stabilize the soil, and begin the slow process of turning rock into earth. For creatures like Brontoscorpio, the presence of these early plants offers a new tactical advantage, a place to hide during the molt, or a bridge to cross from one lagoon to another. The land is no longer a forbidden desert. It is becoming a frontier. The first breath of the plants is the invitation that will eventually pull the animals out of the brine. There is a deep, quiet philosophy in the presence of Cooksonia. It represents the audacity of life to colonize the impossible. In the context of the vast armored Silurian oceans, this tiny plant seems insignificant, yet it carries the blueprint for every forest, every grassland, and every breath of oxygenated air that will follow. It is the beginning of the end for the oceanic monopoly on life. While the sea scorpions continue their violent reign in the water, the silent green fingers of Cooksonia are slowly, patiently claiming the world above. As the sun sets over the Silurian marsh, the shadows of the Cooksonia stalks stretch across the mud, reaching toward the retreating tide. The land is waking up. The silence of the continents is finally being broken by the microscopic rustle of spores catching the wind, a sound that will one day grow into the roar of a living world. To experience the Silurian is to live by the clock of a restless moon. In this era, The celestial dance between the Earth and its satellite is more intimate and more violent than the one we know today. Because the moon is physically closer to our planet, its gravitational tether pulls at the Silurian oceans with a terrifying strength. The result is a world of extreme tidal rhythms, huge sweeping inundations that swallow miles of coastline in an hour, followed by retreats that leave vast stretches of the seafloor exposed to the alien sky. These tides are the heartbeat of the supercontinent Gondwana. As the water surges inward, it creates massive temporary inland sea shallow, hyperoxygenated environments where life is forced to adapt to rapid changes in depth and temperature. For the Eurypterids, these tidal cycles are a conveyor belt of opportunity. As the tide rushes in, it brings with it a bounty of disoriented fish and trilobites swept up from the deeper shelf. The sea scorpions use the momentum of the water to glide deep into the estuaries, patrolling the flooded forests of Cooksonia like armored ghosts. However, the retreat of the tide is equally significant. When the water pours back toward the Panthalassic Deep, it leaves behind a landscape of stranded beauty and peril. Massive lagoons are isolated from the ocean, their salinity levels spiking as the Silurian sun evaporates the trapped brine. In these salt pans, only the hardiest survive. Here, we see the evolutionary pressure that would eventually drive life onto land. A sea scorpion trapped in a drying pool must either burrow into the cool, damp silt or possess the respiratory strength to endure the air until the next surge. This constant rhythmic testing by the moon acted as a filter, selecting for the most resilient and versatile biological designs. The energy of these tides also drives the global climate. The massive movement of water helps distribute heat from the equator toward the poles, preventing the stagnation that leads to ice ages. The Silurian is a world in motion, a liquid machine powered by gravity. The sound of this era is the sound of the tide, a distant, low-frequency roar that never truly ceases, a reminder that the planet is a living system governed by the harmony of the spheres. To the creatures of Gondwana, the moon is not a distant light, but a physical master that dictates when they eat, when they hide, and when they move. Reflecting on these rhythms, one feels the immense grinding patience of deep time. We are used to a world where the land is stable and the sea is distant, but in the Silurian, the boundary between the two is a shifting, blurred frontier. It is a reminder of our own insignificance. The tides of Gondwana rose and fell for millions of years before a human foot ever touched the sand, and they did so with a mechanical indifference that is both beautiful and haunting. As the massive Silurian moon rises over the horizon, casting a cold silver glare across the mudflats, the water begins its inevitable return. The tidal rhythms begin anew, and beneath the foam of the incoming surge, the armored scorpions rise from the silt, ready to claim the land that the moon has once again gifted to the sea. In the silt-heavy depths where the sunlight struggles to penetrate, we encounter a different breed of predator, Carcinosoma. If Pterygotus is the agile raptor of the shallows, Carcinosoma is the heavy tank of the seafloor. With its broad, spade-like body and a carapace that flares out into a formidable, shield-like shape, it represents a specialized branch of the Eurypterid lineage, one that traded the speed of the open water for the crushing power of the benthos. The physical presence of Carcinosoma is imposing. Its body is significantly wider and more robust than its cousins, giving it a low center of gravity that is perfect for anchoring itself against the powerful Silurian currents. Its walking legs are thick and reinforced, designed for hauling its massive weight across the uneven terrain of the stromatoporoid mounds. But the most striking feature of this heavyweight is its tail. Unlike the flat swimming paddles of the more pelagic Eurypterids, the telson of Carcinosoma is often curved and wickedly pointed, leading early paleontologists to wonder if it functions similarly to the stinger of a modern scorpion. The sensory world of Carcinosoma is tuned to the vibrations of the mud. Because it lives in more turbid, sediment-rich environments, its compound eyes are positioned differently, often more centrally on its broad head shield. Providing a focused view of the ground immediately in front of it, it is a master of the shove. It uses its broad prosoma to bulldoze through the silt, unearthing buried brachiopods or scavenging on the carcasses of orthocones that have fallen from the heights. When it finds a living target, it does not strike with the elegance of a claw. It pins its prey with its heavy spine-lined limbs and uses its sheer bulk to overwhelm any resistance. Life for a Calcinosoma is a slow, methodical grind. It occupies the heavy industry niche of the Silurian ecosystem, processing the organic-rich sediments and keeping the seafloor in a constant state of turnover. There is a brutal efficiency to its design. It does not need to be fast because nothing in its environment can easily displace it. Its armor is thick enough to withstand the investigative nips of early-jawed fish, and its weight makes it a difficult meal for even the largest cephalopods. It is the immovable object of the Silurian deep. Reflecting on the heavyweight nature of Calcinosoma, we see the diversity of the Eurypterid plan. Evolution did not just produce one type of sea scorpion, it explored every possible permutation of the armored form. Calcinosoma reminds us that in the history of life, being the strongest or the most durable is often just as effective as being the fastest. It is a creature of the earth and the salt, a biological fortress that stood its ground while the world around it drifted toward more agile, fragile forms. As the heavy silt settles around its broad plates, Calcinosoma becomes one with the seafloor, a living piece of geography. It is the anchor of the Silurian, a reminder that beneath the shimmering surface of the sea, the world is built on the strength of those who can carry the weight of the deep. To navigate the Silurian is to understand that the ocean is not a static body of water, but a complex machine of moving currents, a global engine driven by heat, salt, and the rotation of the earth. Within this engine, the most influential forces are the invisible rivers that flow beneath the surface. We call this the siphon's call. These currents are the primary distributors of life, carrying the silver marine snow from the productive shallows into the hungry maws of the deep, and transporting the microscopic larvae of sea scorpions across vast oceanic distances to colonize new worlds. The mechanics of these currents in the Silurian were dictated by the unique arrangement of the continents, with the massive supercontinent of Gondwana sitting over the South Pole and smaller land masses like Laurentia and Baltica drifting near the equator. The ocean's circulation was far more open than it is today. Without the north-south barriers of the Americas, a massive equatorial current swept around the globe, creating a thermal highway of warm, nutrient-rich water. This was the pulse of the planet. For a cephalopod like an orthocone, the siphon's call was a source of effortless travel. By adjusting its buoyancy and catching these deep time jets, a 5-meter-long predator could migrate across an entire hemisphere with the caloric cost of a single heartbeat. However, the current is a double-edged sword. Along the edges of the continental shelves, these invisible rivers often collide with the rising seafloor, causing upwelling. This is when cold, nutrient-dense water from the anoxic trenches is forced upward into the sunlit zone. In the Silurian, these upwelling events triggered biological explosions, blooms of plankton so thick they could turn the water the color of bruised plums. For the sea scorpions, these events were a dinner bell. They would gather at the shelf break, their compound eyes tracking the massive schools of jawless fish that follow the plankton. The siphon's call directed the violence of the ocean, concentrating life into specific, high-energy corridors. The sensory experience of the current is one of constant rhythmic vibration. Every creature in the Silurian Sea possesses some form of mechanoreceptor, from the delicate hairs on a Eurypterid's limbs to the lateral lines of the early fish to interpret the pressure waves of the moving water. To hear the siphon's call is to understand the language of the deep. It tells the hunter which way the prey has fled. It tells the brachiopod when to open its shell to feed. It tells the plant spores on the coast which way the wind-driven spray will carry them. In a world without sound as we know it, the movement of the water is the only symphony. There is a profound, stoic beauty in the realization that every creature we have encountered is merely a passenger on this global conveyor. The siphon's call reminds us that life is a collaborative effort between the biological and the geophysical. The sea scorpions were not just masters of their own strength, they were masters of the ocean's momentum. They understood in a cold, instinctive way that to resist the current was to die, and to follow it was to find the future. As the sun catches the foam of a breaking wave far above, the deep currents continue their silent, heavy work. They pull the debris of the old world into the trenches and lift the promise of the new world toward the light. The siphon's call never ceases. It is the persistent, watery breath of a planet that is slowly, patiently evolving into something more complex. There are moments in the Silurian calendar when the ocean floor seems to come alive, moving with a singular, shadowed intent. This is the Great Eurypterid Migration. Driven by a combination of lunar cycles and the shifting temperature of the siphon's call, thousands of sea scorpions begin a journey that spans hundreds of miles across the continental shelves. They move in vast, silent phalanxes, their armored carapaces overlapping like the scales of a gargantuan, submerged serpent. To witness this event is to see the first grand-scale migration of the animal kingdom, a pilgrimage of chitin and instinct. The mechanics of this journey are a marvel of deep-time navigation. Without a North Star or complex landmarks, the Eurypterids rely on a sophisticated internal compass. Recent studies suggest that these ancient arthropods may have been sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field, sensing the invisible lines of flux through specialized receptors in their nervous system. They follow the contours of the limestone reefs and the deep-sea trenches with a mechanical precision, their pace dictated by the rhythmic thrum of the tides. They do not stop to feed, they do not deviate. They are driven by a biological program that predates the very concept of thought. As they march, the sea scorpions transform the environment around them. The sheer volume of thousands of heavy multi-legged predators creates a localized sediment storm. They churn the seafloor, unearthing buried nutrients and clearing away the living carpet of brachiopods in their path. For the small scavengers of the Silurian, the worms, and the tiny, opportunistic trilobites, the migration is a windfall. They follow in the wake of the giants, feasting on the debris and the smaller organisms crushed beneath the weight of the march. The migration is not just a movement of animals, it is a movement of energy, a redistribution of the ocean's wealth across the barren plains of the deep. The destination of this journey is often a specific lagoon or sheltered estuary, chosen for its chemical stability or its lack of larger predators like the massive orthocones. Here, the migration culminates in the molting graveyards and mating rites explored in previous chapters. The journey itself is where the true resilience of the species is tested. Along the way, they must navigate the anoxic traps of the deep basins and the predatory gauntlets of the reef edges. Only the strongest reach the end. This is the crucible of the Silurian, a process of natural selection that ensures only the most robust genetic blueprints are passed on to the next generation. Reflecting on the Great Migration, we see a world that is far more organized than it appears. The Silurian Sea is not a chaotic wilderness. It is a world of patterns, cycles, and scheduled movements. The sea scorpions are the masters of these patterns. Their migration is a reminder that life, even in its most primitive and armored forms, is never truly aimless. It is always moving toward a goal, always striving to overcome the distance between the present and the future. As the last of the armored phalanx disappears into the emerald gloom of the distant shelf, the seafloor returns to its silent, rhythmic breathing. The migration is past, but the path remains a ghost road in the silt, waiting for the moon to signal the next great movement of the armored kings. In the open reaches of the Silurian water column, a new silhouette begins to challenge the dominance of the heavy-set Eurypterids. These are the Acanthidae, colloquially known as the spiny sharks. They are not true sharks. The lineage that leads to the modern great white is still in its infancy, but they are the first vertebrates to master the art of the active midwater hunt. To observe an Acanthidian is to see the blueprint for the modern fish, a sleek, fusiform body designed for speed, propelled by a powerful tail and stabilized by an array of rigid, defensive spines. The defining characteristic of these spiny sharks is the rows of sharp, bony spines that support their fins. Unlike the soft rays of modern fish, these spines are immovable, fixed firmly into the musculature of the body. They serve as a lethal deterrent against the snapping claws of Pterygotus. A sea scorpion attempting to seize an Acanthodian would find itself clutching a mouthful of needles. This was a critical evolutionary adaptation. In a world of giant arthropods, the only way for a soft-bodied vertebrate to survive was to become too painful to swallow. These spines are the heralds of a new tactical philosophy, defense through weaponry rather than just heavy plating. The internal architecture of the Acanthodian is where the real revolution lies. They are among the first creatures to possess a skeleton that is partially ossified, turning from soft cartilage into hard bone. This provided the structural rigidity needed for high-speed maneuvers that would have shattered the frames of earlier jawless fish. Their eyes are large and positioned laterally, giving them an acute sense of the three-dimensional space of the open sea. While the sea scorpions are masters of the two-dimensional seafloor, the Acanthodians are the masters of the up and down. They can dive and climb with a fluid grace, using the water column as a sanctuary and a hunting ground. Feeding for the Acanthidians was a matter of high-speed interception. Possessing early primitive jaws, they were not yet the bone crushers of the Devonian, but they were efficient predators of smaller fish and swimming crustaceans. Some species evolved specialized gill rakers, allowing them to strain the thick Silurian marine snow while moving at speed. They represent the transition from the vacuum cleaner to the interceptor. There is an energy to their movement that the Silurian has not seen before, a nervous, twitchy vitality that contrasts with the cold, slow-motion calculations of the sea scorpions. The rise of the Acanthidae signals the beginning of the end for the arthropods' monopoly on power. They were the first vertebrates to prove that speed and agility could overcome size and armor. In the deep time perspective, the Acanthidians are our distant cousins, the pioneers who took the vertebrate body plan and optimized it for the race. They remind us that power is not always found in the thickness of the shell, but often in the strength of the spine and the sharpness of the eye. As the sun catches the silver flash of a spiny shark darting through a cloud of plankton, we see the future of the ocean. The armored kings of the seafloor still reign, but in the blue void above them, a faster, smarter, and thornier rival is beginning to claim the light. In the life of a sea scorpion, growth is not a gradual expansion, but a series of violent structural crises. Because their bodies are encased in a rigid exoskeleton of chitin and mineralized protein, they are trapped within a cage of their own making. To grow, the Eurypterid must undergo ecdysis, the molting of its armor. This is the most dangerous hour in the life of the armored kings, a moment of profound vulnerability where the predator becomes the prey and the master of the sea becomes as soft and helpless as a jellyfish. The process begins with a chemical signal, a hormonal surge that tells the creature its current shell is too small. Beneath the old scarred armor, the Eurypterid begins to secrete a new, paper-thin skin. It then absorbs a large volume of seawater, swelling its body until the internal pressure forces the old carapace to fracture. Typically, the shell splits along the seismic lines of the head shield. With a series of rhythmic, agonizing heaves, the sea scorpion backs out of its old self. It leaves behind a perfect, translucent ghost of its former body limbs, gills, and even the coverings of its eyes, cast off and discarded in the silt. In the immediate aftermath of the molt, the Eurypterid is a soft shell. Its new armor is pale and wrinkled, lacking the mineral density to provide protection or even the structural leverage needed for its powerful muscles to work. It cannot swim, it cannot hunt, it can barely crawl. In this state, it is an irresistible lure for the very creatures it usually terrorizes. The small, jawed placoderms and even its own kin can sense the chemical scent of the fresh, unhardened chitin. To survive, the sea scorpion must find a sanctuary burrowing deep into the carbonate mud or wedging itself into the jagged crevices of a stromatoporoid mound. This period of hardening takes several hours, as the creature pulls calcium and magnesium from the surrounding Silurian brine to calcify its new skin. It is a transformation of the most literal kind, a turning of flesh into stone. During these hours of stillness, the Eurypterid is at its most perceptive. Every vibration in the water is a potential death sentence. The philosophy of the molt is one of becoming. It is a reminder that even the most formidable armor is a temporary prison, and a progress always requires a period of absolute risk. To be stronger tomorrow, one must be willing to be completely defenseless today. There is a haunting beauty to the molting graveyards found in the Silurian strata. Thousands of these empty stone-cold husks are often found together, perfectly preserved. They are not the remains of the dead, but the records of growth, the discarded shadows of a species that refuse to be contained. They serve as a testament to the relentless driving force of evolution. The sea scorpion does not fear the molt. It is the molt. It is a creature that lives in a cycle of death and rebirth, shedding its past to accommodate a larger, more lethal future. As the sun sets, a newly hardened Eurypterid emerges from the silt. Its armor is darker now, stronger than before, and its claws are sharper. It leaves its old self to be slowly buried by the shifting sands, a hollow monument to a life that has already moved on. The king is reborn, and the hunt begins anew. As we move toward the interiors of the Silurian continents, the open ocean gives way to a landscape of surreal and punishing chemistry. These are the restricted basins of the Salina group vast, landlocked lagoons where the water is so saturated with minerals that it feels more like liquid glass than sea. In these environments, the Silurian sun acts as a relentless distiller, evaporating the water and leaving behind thick, shimmering crusts of halite and gypsum. It is a world of extreme salinity, a place where the line between the biological and the geological becomes dangerously thin. To a modern observer, the Salina group habitats would look like a shimmering, turquoise wasteland. The water is remarkably clear, purged of most plankton by its own toxicity, but the seafloor is a riot of colour. Massive mats of salt-loving cyanobacteria bloom in hues of deep purple and burnt orange, creating a slimy, vibrant carpet that thrives where other life fails. This is the ultimate extremophile frontier. For a creature to live here, it must possess a physiology capable of resisting the osmotic pull of the brine, which seeks to draw every drop of moisture from living cells. Surprisingly, the Eurypterids did not just survive here, they flourished. Species like Eurypterids remites, the quintessential sea scorpion seem to have preferred these hypersaline environments. The lack of larger open ocean predators like the massive orthocones provided a sanctuary, but the true advantage was chemical. The high concentration of magnesium and calcium in the Salina waters made the process of hardening a new exoskeleton after a molt much faster. In these salt-heavy cradles, a sea scorpion could transition from a vulnerable, soft shell to an armoured tank in a fraction of the time it took on the open reef. However, life in the Salina group was a precarious gamble. These basins were subject to seasonal cycles of total evaporation. As the water level dropped, the salinity would reach a tipping point where the minerals would spontaneously crystallize out of the water, falling like a silent white snow of salt that could bury entire colonies alive. We see the evidence of these sudden hosses in the fossil record slabs of dolostone, where hundreds of Eurypterids are preserved in pristine detail, frozen in the act of crawling toward a retreating shoreline that never returned. There is a stark, minimalist beauty in the philosophy of the Salina habitats. They remind us that life often seeks out the margins, finding opportunity in the very conditions that seem designed to destroy it. The sea scorpions of the Salina group were the pioneers of the harsh path, choosing the safety of the desert over the competition of the jungle. They were the masters of the brine, a lineage that proved that resilience is not just about strength, but about the ability to inhabit the impossible. As the sun bakes the salt flats, the air above the Salina lagoons shimmers with a heavy metallic heat. Beneath the surface, the armoured kings drift through the thick, warm liquid, their chitinous plates encrusted with fine white crystals. They are the sovereigns of a world made of salt, living monuments to the endurance of life in a changing world. As we lift our gaze from the brine of the Salina lagoons toward the damp, silent shorelines, we encounter a silhouette that defies the logic of the modern world. Standing like jagged, solitary pillars against the pale Silurian sky are the prototaxites, reaching heights of nearly 9 meters taller than a 2-story building. These are the largest living things on land. For over a century, they were a mystery to science, appearing like fossilized wood but lacking the rings of a tree. We now know the truth. These were not plants, but gargantuan spire-like fungi. To walk among a grove of prototaxites would be a surreal experience. There are no leaves to rustle in the wind, no branches to provide shade. Instead, the trunk is a solid, fated mass of microscopic tube-like filaments called hyphae. These fungi did not photosynthesize. They were the planet's first great recyclers. They fed on the cryptogamic crust, a thin, living carpet of lichens, mosses, and cyanobacteria that was slowly beginning to digest the Silurian rock. By breaking down this organic matter, the prototaxites were the primary engineers of the world's first true soils, preparing the earth for the forests that were still millions of years away. The relationship between these fungal giants and the sea scorpions is one of proximity and transition. As the tides pull back, exposing the mudflats, the shadows of the prototaxites fall across the armored carapaces of the Eurypterids. In the humid Silurian air, these fungal spires acted as landmarks for the early pioneers of the land. For a creature like Brontoscorpio, the base of a prototaxite offered a damp, sheltered microclimate, a refuge from the desiccating sun. The fungi provided the structural complexity that the barren land lacked, creating the first terrestrial reefs where moisture was trapped and small prey could congregate. The presence of prototaxites forces a reflection on the scale of time. These giants dominated the land for at least 40 million years, far longer than the reign of most dinosaur species. They represent a lost path of evolution, a time when the kingdom of fungi rather than plants held the heights of the world. They were the silent, towering witnesses to the first tentative steps of animals out of the sea. In their presence, the frantic predatory energy of the sea scorpions feels small. The prototaxites were the masters of the long, slow decay, thriving on the patience of the stone. As the Silurian wind whistles through the gaps in the fungal pillars, it carries the spores of a future we are only beginning to glimpse. The prototaxites stand as monuments to a transitionary world, a bridge between the sterile rock of the past and the green canopy of the future. Beneath their towering shadows, the sea scorpions continue to test the mud, unaware that the world they are entering is being built by the very fungi that will one day reclaim their remains. The sun begins to set, casting the long, needle-like shadows of the fungi across the retreating tide. The land is no longer empty. It is a world of silent giants, waiting for the animals to catch up. While the sea scorpions refined their claws, the early vertebrates of the Silurian were perfecting a different kind of survival, the art of the head shield. This is the era of the osteostraci, a group of jawless fish that transformed their cranial anatomy into a heavy, bony fortress. To look upon a creature like Cephalaspis is to see a biological design governed by the need for defense against the crushing grip of the Eurypterid. Their heads were encased in a singular, solid plate of dermal boned, a cephalic shield shaped like a broad, flattened horseshoe. The cephalic shield was more than just a helmet. It was a sophisticated sensory array. Along the margins of the shield, and in a central strip behind the eyes, lay recessed areas covered by small, mosaic-like plates. These are known as the sensory fields. Connected directly to the large, complex brain via thick nerves, these fields likely functioned as electroreceptors or pressure sensors, allowing the fish to detect the bioelectric field of a buried worm or the low-frequency vibrations of an approaching sea scorpion. In the murky, sediment-rich waters of the Silurian seafloor, these fish were effectively seeing with their skin, navigating a world of invisible forces. The underside of the shield was a masterpiece of specialized adaptation. The mouth and gill openings were small and tucked away, protecting the vulnerable soft tissues from the jagged edges of the reef or the prying limbs of predators. This design forced a specific lifestyle. The osteostraci were bottom feeders, using their broad, flat shields to plow through the organic-rich silt, much like a modern vacuum cleaner. Yet despite their heavy armor, they were surprisingly agile. They were among the first fish to possess paired pectoral fins, allowing them to tilt, roll, and fly through the water column with a precision their predecessors lacked. The relationship between the cephalic shield and the Eurypterid claw is one of the great evolutionary arms races of deep time. As the sea scorpions grew larger and their pincers more powerful, the bony plates of the fish grew thicker and more complex. This struggle drove the development of true bone tissue, a material that would eventually form the basis of all vertebrate skeletons, including our own. The osteostraci were not merely victims, they were the catalysts for structural innovation. They proved that life would not be easily consumed, that it would invest its very chemistry into the creation of impenetrable barriers. There is a somber, stoic beauty in the design of the osteostraci. They represent a life defined by its boundaries, a creature that lived entirely within the protection of its own stony mind. They remind us that intelligence and sensation often begin as a means of survival, a way to map the dangers of a hostile world. While the sea scorpions were the sword of the Silurian, these armored fish were the shield, a silent, bony resistance that persisted in the shadows of the giants. As the tide pulls a fresh layer of silt over a resting Cephalaspis, its sensory fields continue to pulse, monitoring the silent movements of the deep. The shield remains unbroken, a testament to the fact that in the Silurian, the most powerful thing one could be was immovable. Leaving the crowded, competitive cities of the coral reefs and the mineral-choked lagoons, we drift into the vast blue desert of the open ocean, the pelagic zone. In the Silurian, this is the most immense habitat on Earth, a singular, global body of water that knows no boundaries. Here, the seafloor drops away into a vertical abyss, and the only landmarks are the shifting rays of sunlight that pierce the emerald deep. It is a world of absolute solitude, where the sound of the planet is reduced to a low liquid hum, and the primary challenge of existence is not the predator, but the void. To be a pelagic creature in the Silurian is to be a master of buoyancy. Away from the seafloor, there is no place to rest. To stop moving is to sink into the anoxic dark. This is the realm of the graptolite strange, colonial organisms that drift like delicate serrated ribbons through the water column, often found as carbonized pencil marks on dark shale. In life they were complex, branching structures of protein, housing thousands of tiny individuals. They are the drifters of deep time, their survival tied entirely to the whims of the siphon's call. They represent the first great success of colonial life in the open sea, turning the void into a productive, floating garden. The sensory experience of the pelagic zone is one of sensory deprivation and sudden, sharp clarity. The water is purer here, devoid of the sediment of the coastlines, allowing light to travel further. This clarity birthed the first long-distance eyes. Early cephalopods and the sleek, jawless Burkenia developed vision optimized for detecting movement against the vast blue background. In this blue cathedral, there is nowhere to hide. Survival depends on silvering the use of reflective scales to mirror the surrounding water, or on being so small and translucent that you become part of the light itself. However, the silence of the pelagic zone is occasionally broken by the arrival of the blue giants. This is where the largest orthocones, freed from the constraints of the reef, could reach their full potential. They move like horizontal towers, their tentacles trailing in the current, sensing the chemical wake of a passing school of fish from miles away. In the open sea, the relationship between predator and prey becomes a geometric game of interception. There is a cold, mathematical beauty to a hunt that takes place in a three-dimensional infinity, where the only limit to growth is the amount of oxygen one can pull from the brine. Reflecting on the pelagic void, we encounter the philosophy of the unbound. This vast space reminds us that life, at its most ambitious, seeks to fill every corner of the universe, no matter how empty or indifferent. The creatures of the open Silurian Sea were the first to conquer the horizon. They proved that life did not need the shore or the soil to thrive. It only needed the water and the light. They were the pioneers of the great beyond, living their entire lives in a state of constant rhythmic motion, suspended between the sun and the abyss. As we hover in the center of this blue world, the light begins to fail, and the surface becomes a shimmering, distant memory. The pelagic zone is a place of deep peace and terrifying scale, a reminder that we are small and the ocean is very, very old. As the Silurian reaches its climactic final acts, the boundary between the salt water and the parched land is finally breached by a creature of terrifying versatility, Brontoscorpio endicus. While its cousins grew to monstrous sizes in the deep, Brontoscorpio refined its anatomy for the frontier. Measuring nearly a meter in length, it was not the largest Eurypterid, but it was arguably the most significant. It represents the moment the sea scorpion truly began to resemble the terrors of the modern world, possessing a heavy, curved stinger and a respiratory system that whispered of a future on dry land. The anatomy of Brontoscorpio is a masterclass in transitional biology. Its most striking feature is its massive singular stinger-sharp, chitinous telson that could be swung with hydraulic force. Unlike the swimming paddles of Pterygotis, the limbs of Brontoscorpio were robust and jointed for weight-bearing. This allowed it to haul its armored bulk across the intertidal mudflats and the mats of early land plants. But its true secret lay within its chest. Brontoscorpio possessed a dual-purpose respiratory system, book gills that functioned in the water, and a structural arrangement that allowed it to extract oxygen from the air for short periods. This was the amphibious tank of the Silurian. To imagine the life of Brontoscorpio is to imagine a life of tactical opportunism. As the tide receded, leaving fish and smaller Eurypterids trapped in shallowing pools, Brontoscorpio would emerge from the surf. It moved with a slow, heavy clack-clack-clack across the wet rocks, its large compound eyes tracking the frantic movement of stranded prey. On land, it was an alien god. Nothing else had its size, its armor, or its lethality. It would pin a struggling jawless fish with its heavy pedipalps and deliver a killing strike with its stinger, a behavior that would echo through the next 400 million years of scorpion evolution. The presence of Brontoscorpio on the Silurian shorelines had a profound evolutionary impact. It turned a land once a sanctuary for the early plants and the first tiny soil-dwelling arthropods into a hunting ground. This forced the first breathers to adapt further, driving life to hide deeper in the soil or to develop their own defenses. Brontoscorpio was the catalyst for the terrestrial arms race. It proved that the ocean's mastery could be exported and that the chemistry of silence could be replaced by the frantic, gasping struggle for air. Reflecting on the rise of Brontoscorpio, we see the profound courage of the biological impulse. To leave the buoyant, supportive embrace of the water for the crushing gravity and desiccating heat of the land is a monumental risk. Brontoscorpio did not do this out of ambition, but out of a cold, predatory necessity. It followed the food. In doing so, it became a bridge between the ancient empires of the sea and the coming kingdoms of the land. It is a reminder that our own terrestrial existence began with a creature that refused to be contained by the shoreline. As the Silurian sun bakes the mudflats, Brontoscorpio stands still, its stinger poised over a dying lagoon. It is the king of the transition, a nightmare in the half-light, waiting for the world to catch up to its audacity. The era of the sea is far from over, but the land has finally felt the weight of the armor. While the armored scorpions claimed the shallows, the very ground beneath them was in a state of slow tectonic upheaval. The Silurian is defined by a gargantuan closing of the world, the final grinding union of the continents, Laurentia, Baltica, and Avalonia. This was the closing of the Iapetus, an event where an entire ocean, once thousands of miles wide, was slowly swallowed by the Earth's mantle. To a creature living in the silt, this process was invisible, yet it dictated the salinity, the temperature, and the very survival of every species in the sea. The mechanics of this drift are a testament to the colossal power of internal planetary heat. As the oceanic crust of the Iapetus was subducted beneath the encroaching continents, it triggered volcanic arcs that belched ash and minerals into the atmosphere, further fueling the greenhouse warmth of the era. The gap between the great land masses narrowed by centimeters each year, a pace that seems glacial to us. But in the context of deep time, it was a rapid transformation. The once open seaways were being pinched into narrow, high-energy straits. This geological drift created a unique environment of intense current activity, forcing life to adapt to waters that were constantly being reshuffled and redirected. As the continents collided, they did not merely touch, they buckled. This was the birth of the Caledonian orogeny, the rising of a mountain range that would once have rivaled the Himalayas. For the sea scorpions, this meant the destruction of their ancient habitats. The deep water trenches were being squeezed shut and the shallow sun-drenched shells were being pushed upward, turning into parched land. This tectonic pressure created the old red sandstone environments, vast deltamic systems where the fresh water from the rising mountains met the brine of the retreating sea. It was in these brackish, shifting estuaries that the final chapters of the Eurypterid reign would be written. The closing of the Iapetus represents the inevitable crowding of the world. The vast, lonely stretches of the Panthalastic Ocean were being bordered by a new supercontinent, Laurussia. This consolidation of land changed the global climate, altering the Scythian's call and creating more pronounced seasonal variations. Life was no longer drifting in an endless blue void. It was being funneled into specific high-pressure corridors. The philosophy of the drift is one of no permanent address. It reminds us that the stage upon which the drama of life unfolds is itself a moving, living participant, capable of erasing entire ecosystems through the simple, heavy logic of gravity and heat. There is a profound stoic beauty in the image of a sea scorpion patrolling a reef that is being slowly hoisted out of the water by the collision of continents. The creature is oblivious to the fact that its kingdom is being dismantled by the very earth it walks upon. We are reminded that we are all passengers on a drifting ship, and that the stability we perceive in the mountains and the seas is merely an illusion of our brief lifespans. As the sun sets over the narrowing straits of the Iapetus, the volcanic peaks on the horizon glow with a dark, angry light. The world is getting smaller, and the pressure, both biological and geological, is reaching a breaking point. In the landscape of the Silurian, we encounter a profound evolutionary enigma, the decline of the trilobite. For over 100 million years, these segmented masters of the mud had been the face of the Paleozoic. They were the ultimate generalists, surviving the great cold and the shifting chemistry of the deep. Yet, as the sea scorpions rose to their predatory peak and the first jawed fish began to snap at the currents, the trilobite began a slow, dignified retreat from its former glory. This is the paradox of the trilobite, a creature that reached its highest level of aesthetic and structural sophistication at the very moment its dominance began to fail. To look at a Silurian trilobite, such as Dalmanites or Incronuris, is to see a miracle of defensive architecture. No longer content with simple flat shells, these creatures evolved an array of baroque features. They grew long, elegant tail spines, towering, pedunculate eyes that acted like periscopes, and the ability to enroll into a perfect, impenetrable ball of calcite behavior known as volvation. This was a response to the armor era. Every spike and every curve was a calculated answer to the crushing power of the Eurypterid claw. The trilobite became a fortress, a masterpiece of biological engineering designed to exist in a world that had become increasingly violent. The paradox lies in the fact that this very specialization may have been their undoing. As the geological drift closed the Iapetus Ocean and narrowed the available habitats, the generalists began to struggle. The new predators, the agile Acanthidians and the massive Pterygotus, were no longer just looking for a meal. They were changing the speed of the ocean. Trilobites were masters of the slow, methodical crawl, but they could not compete with the three-dimensional mobility of the rising vertebrate class. They were the old guard, perfected for a world of silt and shadow, now forced to survive in a world of light and speed. Furthermore, the reproductive strategy of the trilobite remained tied to the vulnerability of the sea floor. While the sea scorpions were beginning to explore the estuaries and the fish were mastering the open pelagic zones, the trilobite remained anchored to the benthos. Their larvae were planktonic, drifting at the mercy of the siphon's call, where they were increasingly preyed upon by the burgeoning schools of jawless fish. The living carpet was being thinned out, not by a single extinction event, but by the relentless pressure of a world that was simply moving on. Reflecting on the trilobite's journey, we see a mirror of our own anxieties. It is possible to be perfect for a world that no longer exists. The trilobites of the Silurian were not failures. They were the pinnacle of their design. They represent the beauty of persistence in the face of obsolescence. They remind us that evolution does not reward complexity for its own sake, but only the ability to adapt to the next unforeseen rhythm of the planet. As a lone Dolmanite burrows into the carbonate sand, its towering eyes scanning the teal horizon for the shadow of the sea scorpion, we feel the weight of its legacy. It is a creature of the old world, a gem of the Paleozoic, holding its ground while the tide of history pulls in a different direction. The trilobite is fading, but it does so with its armor polished and its eyes wide open to the deep time that created it. Beyond the shimmering coral cities and the violent tides of the shelf, the Silurian world plunges into an abyss that remains one of the great mysteries of deep time. Here, the continental slope falls away into the Hadal depths of the Panthalassic Ocean, a realm where the light of the sun has never reached, and where the chemistry of life is dictated by the slow, hot breath of the Earth's mantle. In these deepest trenches, the silence is so profound it feels like a physical weight, and the pressure is a crushing force that would liquefy any creature from the shallows. The life that inhabits these trenches is a specialized spectral version of the Silurian. Away from the productive siphon's call of the surface, there is no photosynthesis. Instead, the ecosystem is fueled by chemosynthesis, the harvesting of energy from the mineral-rich plumes of hydrothermal vents. Along the jagged volcanic cracks of the seafloor, we find colonies of giant white tube worms and primitive eyeless crustaceans that have never known the concept of day or night. For these creatures, the world is a landscape of heat and cold, defined by the chemical gradients of hydrogen sulfide and methane. The Eurypterids that found their way into these depths were rare, specialized drifters. In the deep trenches, we see the limit of the arthropod design. The high pressure and the scarcity of calcium carbonate make it difficult to maintain a heavy, mineralized shell. Consequently, the deep-sea scorpions of the Silurian were likely smaller, with thinner, more flexible carapaces and elongated sensory limbs designed to detect the faint thermal signatures of the vents. They were the ghosts of their kind, living on the thin edge of what was biologically possible, processing the marine snow that took months to drift down from the surface world. There is a terrifying, prehistoric peace to the Silurian abyss. It represents the old silence, the state of the planet before the rise of the atmosphere and the light. In these trenches, time does not move in seasons or lunar cycles. It moves in the slow million-year pulse of plate tectonics. To be here is to be inside the very machinery of the Earth. It is a reminder that the rise of the armored scorpions was a surface-level drama, a brief flicker of activity on the thin skin of a world that is, at its core, a dark and volcanic machine. Reflecting on the deepest trenches, we encounter the philosophy of the hidden world. These depths remind us that for every creature we see in the light, there are 1,000 more living in the shadows, thriving in conditions that would be lethal to us. The Silurian trenches were the ultimate refuges, stable and unchanging while the continents above collided and the oceans closed. They are the memory banks of the planet, holding the ancient chemical secrets of life's origin in their lightless, high-pressure grip. As we begin our slow ascent from the midnight zone, the heat of the vents fades, replaced by the cold, indifferent weight of the deep. The trenches remain behind us, a dark, silent foundation for the world above, a place where the Silurian never truly ended but simply retreated into the eternal dark. To find the Silurian today, one must look not at the water, but at the stone. The vibrant, violent world of the sea scorpions has been compressed over hundreds of millions of years into the silent grey strata of the Earth's crust. This is the memory of the stones, the process by which the flesh and chitin of the ancient seas were transformed into the architecture of our modern landscape. From the sheer cliffs of the Welsh borderlands to the limestone quarries of New York and the rugged peaks of the Scandinavian Caledonides, the Silurian persists as a geological ghost, a record written in the alphabet of fossils and minerals. The preservation of this memory is a matter of exquisite timing. For a Eurypterid to be remembered, it had to die in exactly the right place, usually in the fine-grained, oxygen-poor muds of a lagoon or a restricted basin. In these Lagerstätten, the normal process of decay was suspended. The soft tissues were replaced, atom by atom, by iron, pyrite or silica, creating a permanent three-dimensional cast of a life that lasted only a few seasons. When we look at a fossil of Eurypterus, we are not just looking at a bone. We are looking at the exact texture of its skin, the curvature of its eyes, and the sharpness of the spines on its legs. The stone has captured a single frozen heartbeat of deep time. But the memory of the stones is also found in the chemistry of the rocks themselves. The massive old red sandstone that defines much of the late Silurian is a record of the rising mountains and the eroding continents. The red hue comes from the oxidation of iron, a signal that the Earth's atmosphere was becoming increasingly oxygen-rich as the early plants like Cooksonia began their work. Every layer of silt is a page in a diary recording the closing of the Euphrates Ocean, the shift in global temperatures, and the slow, inevitable transition from a world of water to a world of land. The stones do not lie. They hold the chemical truth of a planet in flux. Reflecting on this geological record, we encounter the philosophy of persistence through erasure. To become a part of the Earth's memory, the individual must be destroyed. The sea scorpion had to perish. Its home had to be crushed by shifting continents, and its sea had to vanish for us to know it ever existed. There is a profound humility in this realization. Our own history, our cities and our lives will one day be nothing more than a thin, chemical signature in the strata of the future. We are all, eventually, destined to be remembered by the stones. As we stand on a modern coastline, looking out over a sea that no longer holds the giants of the Silurian, we are standing on the ruins of their world. The limestone beneath our feet is composed of the crushed shells of 1 billion brachiopods and the discarded carapaces of the armored king. The memory of the stones is the only thing that remains of that ancient sapphire desert, a silent, stony bridge that allows us to reach back across 400 million years and touch the face of a world we can only see in our dreams. The sun sets over the modern horizon, casting long shadows across the fossil-rich cliffs. The stones are cold and silent, but if you listen closely to the rhythm of the deep, you can still hear the echo of the armor clicking in the dark. As the final curtain falls on our journey through the Silurian, we must step back from the frantic pulse of the hunt and the grinding of the continents to witness the ultimate master of this era, time itself, the world of the yin and the profound cold silence that eventually swallows every apex predator, every coral spire, and every emerald sea. It is the realization that the 443 million years separating us from the sea scorpion are not merely a distance, but a transformation, a slow, geological exhale where the planet forgot the taste of the Silurian salt to make room for the sense of the future. In the grand architecture of the universe, the Silurian was a brief, high-energy shimmer. The sea scorpions, for all their armored magnificence and terrifying reach, were never meant to be permanent. They were a successful experiment in a specific set of conditions, a high mineral, high tide, greenhouse world. As the Earth continued its restless evolution, the very environment that created them began to dissolve. The rising mountains of the Caledonian Drift drained their lagoons. The cooling atmosphere changed the siphon's call, and the rising intelligence of the jawed fish turned their armor from a fortress into a cage. The kings did not fail, they simply ran out of time. There is a meditative peace in this ending. To think of the Silurian is to embrace the philosophy of human insignificance. We live in the thin now, a narrow slice of history that feels eternal to us, yet we are standing atop a mountain of forgotten worlds. Beneath our cities lie the graveyards of the Eurypterids, their chitinous limbs now part of the limestone that supports our foundations. They are not gone, they are merely sleeping in the strata, a silent layer of the planet's memory that remains long after their last heartbeat faded into the brine. They remind us that dominance is a temporary lease and that the Earth is a patient landlord. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the Silurian Sea one last time. See the massive silver moon hanging low over the Gondwana mudflats. Feel the rhythmic, heavy tug of the tide as it pulls the water away from the prototaxite spires. Hear the distant muffled click of an armored claw against a stone-hard sponge. It is a world of shadows, salt, and ancient intent, a world that existed for millions of years without a single human eye to witness its glory. It is a world that is satisfied with its own silence. The light of the younger sun fades into a bruised, lightless purple. The pressure of the deep becomes a warm, weightless embrace, pulling you down through the layers of the water column, past the shimmering shoals of the Orcania, past the hovering spears of the orthocones, and into the soft velvet silt of the sea floor. Here, in the dark, the chemistry of the ocean is stable, the oxygen is low, the salt is thick. The world of the sea scorpion is finally still, wrapped in the protective shroud of the deep-time shales. The Silurian has ended, the great scorpions have returned to the stone. The land is greening, the fish are rising, and the ocean is ready for its next dream. Close your eyes and let the weight of the eons settle over you. You are part of the cycle, now a brief flicker of consciousness in a universe that has seen empires of armor rise and fall in the blink of a star. Sleep now in the shadow of the giants. Sleep in the memory of the salt. Sleep in the deep, enduring peace of the Silurian.